everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. We're giving you the latest in a movement to boycott that controversial abortion law in Alabama. And the College Board is making some pretty major changes to the SATs. We'll give you updates on that. Plus, Taiwan makes history today. It's becoming the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. But first, here are your headlines.
New details are emerging about how former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn cooperated with the special counsel. Newly unsealed documents lay out Flynn's communications with Russians. He also told investigators people connected to the Trump administration tried to influence his cooperation with the Mueller team. Attorney General William Barr says he's not happy with the answers he's getting about how the Russia investigation started, speaking to Fox News.
I've been trying to get answers to questions, and I found that a lot of the answers have been inadequate. And I've also found that some of the explanations I've gotten don't hang together. So in a sense, I have more questions today than I did when I first started.
Some of what things don't hang together?
Some of the explanations of what occurred.
Why does that matter?
Because I think people have to find out what the government was doing during that period. If we're worried about foreign influence, for the very same reason, we should be worried about whether government officials abuse their power and put their thumb on the scale. And so I'm not saying that happened, but I'm saying that we have to look at that.
More trouble for Brexit. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says talks between his party and the Prime Minister's party have broken down.
The reality is we cannot leave the EU without an agreement. Therefore, the government must recognise that it's going to have to come to a position that retains a customs and trade relationship with the European Union.
And the Boston Bruins swept the Carolina Hurricanes. They advanced to the Stanley Cup Finals.
We begin in Southern California, where an F-16 military jet crashed into a warehouse that was right next to the runway. Thankfully, the pilot ejected and is doing okay. I want to go to Matt Gutman in Riverside, California with more. Matt?
Hey, Kimberly, we are here at March Field. Obviously, this is an air base serving most of the southwest of the United States. Lots of transport planes, but also those F-16s, which do patrols over the west coast of the U.S. to ensure that we don't have another 9/11. They are rigged to fire on and down enemy planes or rogue planes, and that's why a lot of those planes are armed. F-16 is pretty sizable jet, not huge in terms of jets, about 50 feet long, 33 feet, wingspan, 25,000 pounds. And this plane that you just saw careened into a warehouse about a mile away from where we are, slamming into it at probably a couple hundred miles an hour. For some reason, that pilot bailed, pulling the ejection seat, his parachute, the canopy, his chair, most of those landed right near the runway. But for some reason, that jet veered pretty far off course, slamming into that warehouse. And the video from inside that warehouse is pretty incredible. Workers shocked, coming upon the scene and realizing that there is a military jet that just slammed into that warehouse, crushing boxes and those stacks of whatever was in there. But pretty impressive that the jet did not explode. And the concern is whether or not there was ordnance on board. You know, this is an active air base, and sometimes these planes are armed not only with 20-millimeter cannon ammunition, but also Sidewinder missiles that can be armed and can be explosive. So luckily, the fire in that warehouse burned very quickly. The sprinkler system worked. You saw those sprinklers jetting water down on the scene, so much water that it spilled way out into the parking lot, taking debris with it. And that likely created the conditions that made it impossible for that ammunition and those missiles to go off. So that's very good news. Now, just want to give you a lay of the land here. That's the airfield. It's a pretty large air base that continues for about a mile in that direction, but surrounding it are warehouses. There's an industrial zone, and when that plane came down, it came down pretty much at the middle of a workday, around 4 p.m. here, Lots of people were in there, lots of people around, traffic building up on I-215, which is actually just behind me. So there were many witnesses to see what happened, and lots of people were shocked, including the people inside the warehouse who thought that there was some sort of massive explosion, and it created tremendous confusion inside as well. Now, one of the things you didn't see that we expected to see, at least initially, were firefighters at the scene. But because there was possible ordnance on that plane, it was the EOD guys who showed up, and I think they went into the building. We don't yet know. One of the things that's still surprising, at least to me, the Pentagon has not yet said whether or not there was ammunition or live ordnance on that plane. What they did tell us outside this gate here last night is no comment. They likely know. Maybe they're waiting for the investigation, which obviously is going to dig into what was on that plane, why the pilot lost control, and why it veered so far off the runway. We'll obviously keep you posted with whatever we hear. Kimberly.
All right, Matt, had to have been pretty scary to witness that in person. Thank you so much. And guys, we move on to Alabama, an uproar over the state's controversial abortion law. A reminder, this law makes it a felony for any doctor to perform an abortion unless the life of the mother is in danger. There are no exceptions for rape and incest. Now in Alabama, a boycott movement with the hashtag Boycott Alabama is gaining a lot of traction online. So I want to go to Steve Osunsami, who has more. Steve?
Kimberly, the fight over these new abortion restrictions, these laws that are being passed in state legislatures, primarily in the South, has moved from legislative to economic. We're standing in front of the Georgia State Capitol right now, where lawmakers here passed what is being called the heartbeat law. It essentially bans abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, most people would say, when a fetal heartbeat can be detected. And critics point out that that essentially is a near total ban of abortions because that's before most women would even know that they're pregnant. The concern here is over the film industry. More than 450 films have been filmed in Georgia, films and TV shows. This is a huge business here, and it is being threatened. A number of actors and production companies are threatening to either pull their productions or refuse to film here because of the laws, these abortion laws that are happening, and that is threatening to hit Georgians in their pocketbook. Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor and lost to the current governor, Brian Kemp, Republican Brian Kemp, has come out essentially saying that that's not such a great idea and that you're punishing workers. And I would add, as a resident here, that you're also punishing most of the people who live mostly in some of the most liberal counties of Georgia. The governor of Colorado is now threatening a boycott against the state of Alabama, threatening to pull all government travel to the state. There are also boycotts threatened against Alabama's poultry industry and against Mercedes-Benz, which builds cars in Alabama and has headquarters here in Georgia. So this appears to be the next wave of activity on this issue, which is this economic boycott. But again, many residents here would say that it is misplaced. The end game here, of course, is the Supreme Court. This will end up in the Supreme Court. It takes 4 justices to hear the challenges to these laws, and the anti-abortion supporters are hoping that they now have enough justices to overturn Roe v. Wade, of course, which was the 1973 decision that legalized abortion in this country. Kimberly.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And of course, very controversial, but it's not so black and white. The only way to really understand this debate is to hear some personal stories. So I want to bring in Catherine Davis. She's the founder of the Restoration Project, and she's an anti-abortion advocate in Georgia. Catherine, first, thanks for being with us. Your story is particularly interesting because you had 2 abortions in your 20s and then one in your 30s. And then later you said that you regretted it. I want to understand what changed your mind.
Well, I don't think it was later that I regretted it. I think I regretted it immediately, but didn't have the courage to speak that out loud. After my first abortion, I fainted. During the second abortion, even though I was sedated, I heard them counting my baby's body parts. And I realized I had made an irrevocable decision that I couldn't fix, nor could I publicly mourn for those children because the culture, had convinced me and others at the time that the child in the womb was not a baby. It was tissue. It was a blob. And only after I experienced the abortion directly did I realize that that's not exactly true. And you do feel a loss, and you do grieve that loss, even if it is silently, because the culture would frown upon you if you spoke about it out loud.
Yeah, so one thing that you also mentioned to one of our producers is that you feel that abortion should not even happen in the case of incest or rape.
I don't feel like it should, because the woman that experiences the trauma of a rape or the trauma of incest is then going to be subjected to the trauma of abortion. Abortion is not a nonviolent act. And this woman has already suffered the violence and the indignity of a man raping her or having sex with her, a family member having sex with her, and then it's going to be compounded by the abortion that she suffers. And so I don't believe that rape or incest should be a reason for the woman to get an abortion, because she doesn't realize exactly the trauma that she's going to suffer as a result of the decision.
Do you think there's any trauma that's suffered in going ahead and going through with the pregnancy when these situations have occurred?
I think it would be a lesser trauma than living with the abortion decision. One of the things we don't talk about is the depression that follows an abortion decision for many women. The idea that you took a life and you can't really talk about it publicly. You can't tell anyone. Most people are not like me. They're not going to openly talk about their abortion decision and what they're experiencing when there's no one there except them and that decision. And so the idea that there's no consequence to this decision, that it's a blob of tissue like an appendix or something, that is not the case. And there is a consequence, and it's a heavy psychological and even sometimes physical consequence. And I think those are the things we need to start talking about and being honest with women, so that they know going into the decision that it's not a benign procedure.
All right, Catherine Davis in Georgia there, thank you so much for sharing your story. And as we've said, this is very nuanced, so I want to bring in Dana Weinstein. She's an abortion rights advocate in Rockville, Maryland. Dana, you also had a very unique case. You had an abortion during your third trimester because of complications with your baby. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I was happily married. I'm still happily married at the time, happily married with a 2.5-year-old son. And we were so excited to be expanding our family. We were thrilled when we found out that we were pregnant with our second child. Everything with the pregnancy was great. All my prenatal care, testing, everything showed the baby was developing perfectly normal. And at a 29-week sonogram, I was 38 at the time, so I had some extra care just because I was older. I had a sonogram, and the technician, it took a really long time, and the doctor came in and they said, everything with the baby looks great, but the ventricles in her brain are enlarged, and we don't know what's causing that. So we want to send you on for specialized testing. I was sent 2 weeks later, so at this point I was 31 weeks into my pregnancy, thinking everything's great. Had an MRI into my belly to see our baby's brain, to see why those ventricles were so large. And we were shocked when we saw and learned what didn't develop in her brain. Pieces were missing, were malformed, really not at all properly developed. And what that meant was that with our baby, she would have most likely seized to death upon delivery. We would have had to put a resuscitation order in place just to keep her I won't even say alive, existing. We were told and we know that she would have only been able to even be here with significant medical tubes, medicine, not even medicine, nothing was going to allow our baby to grow into a child and into a human being. She had virtually no way that she was going to be able to exist. Certainly wouldn't be living as the child and a thriving adult. She would have seized to death, and it would have been incredibly painful and violent for her and for us as parents to watch. So we chose and are so grateful we had the choice of how our baby was going to die. It was going to happen one way or the other, and we wanted to do it in the way that we felt would be the least painful for her. I also just want to say, with her and our abortion, there's such misconceptions about women like me and how the abortion happens. We actually stopped her heartbeat, and I delivered her perfectly intact.
Yeah, definitely a difficult decision to make. I want to know, given that you've gone through this experience, what do you think of all of the debates and laws that are being passed right now where women may not have that choice in the future?
I'm outraged. I'm scared. I have 3 beautiful children. I had one before, as I mentioned. I was so fortunate because I could get quality care, that we were able to continue growing our family. I worry for their choices in the future for any reason. And the reason I think it's so important that we don't start talking about 3rd trimester or 2nd trimester or 6 weeks, it's abortion rights in total. We cannot start putting criteria upon criteria for someone who is in a unique situation, and every situation is unique, when they are deciding what's right for their body and for themselves.
All right, Dana Weinstein in Rockland, Maryland, thank you so very much for sharing your experience. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And guys, moving on, in the meantime, a major change for the SATs. The College Board is saying it will give more weight to a student's personal background when putting together the final score. So I'm joined by Aaron Katursky, and we also have Susan Shiflett. She was the former admissions officer from Ingenious Prep, also the former assistant director of admissions at Yale. Aaron, I want to start with you, because when they say they're gathering more background on these students, what areas of their life are they trying to get information from?
Primarily, Kimberly, they're looking at the high school that the student comes from itself. Is it a good high school? Is it public? Is it private? What kind of area is it in? And the neighborhood is going to be another important question to determine this so-called adversity score. Is it crime-addled? Is it poverty-stricken? So they're going to draw from census data, from crime statistics, and from other publicly available data to try and come up on a score from 1 to 100, with 50 being in the middle and a higher score being more adversity overcome, to help give college admissions folks a sense of why this person may have scored the way he or she did and what that person had to overcome in order to achieve that score.
Very interesting. And Susan, I just want to ask you, what do you see as the potential positives and then also the negatives of using this new tool?
Thank you, Kimberly. So I think the positives are, while in admissions at places such as Yale, admissions officers are supposed to be gleaning that context from parts of the student application, this will help to provide some consistency. It's more of a way of quantifying this. It takes a more data-driven approach. So the thought is that it would help to flag students who do come from lower socioeconomic statuses. Now, the danger, what some people are arguing, is that this could potentially disadvantage those from higher socioeconomic statuses. The other issue is that it may not capture adversity that a student from a middle-class family or a higher-class family may face. There parents, for instance, may be alcoholics or maybe addicted to opioids, and that it's not clear would be captured. And so I think the difficulty is that people are really outraged, saying, well, if you're admitting more students from these lower socioeconomic statuses, that in a zero-sum game in college admissions means fewer seats for students on the other end.
Yeah, so Aaron, I want to come back to you. How are schools protecting against any potential bias from admissions directors who may see these different areas of their background and may discriminate potentially?
Well, we've heard from some schools, Georgetown in particular as one example, saying that we already do this. We already take into account where a student comes from and what their neighborhood is like and what their life has been like, and they're doing it outside the realm of testing. Because as Susan notes, the test is imperfect to begin with, and there are plenty of critics of the SAT. Now, the SAT is effectively saying you get a score, but don't really pay attention to that score because it may be influenced by other factors, and therefore, are you undermining the test by putting an addendum or an asterisk on it?
And Susan, of course, this comes amid, and Aaron, as you know, you've been covering this for us as well. This comes amid that massive college admission scandal. Is that a coincidence, you guys? Susan first.
Well, the College Board, the nonprofit that administers the SAT, says that it's been studying this adversity score starting in 2015. I do think it's a trend that the College Board, some may say it's a way for them to stay relevant in an age where as noted, the SAT score and ACT score, some schools are going test optional. But I do think in terms of the timing of this unrolling and piloting, it is a perfect storm, and I think is just making parents and students across the nation and across the world even more anxious.
And you, Aaron, what do you think?
I mean, we've been talking for weeks now about rigging the system and getting extra time on the test and getting a proctor to take the test for you or to correct your answers. This is meant in some ways as a corrective to that, so that wealth and privilege isn't able to co-opt a process that is still widely used to determine or to help determine admissions.
All right, Aaron Katursky and Susan Shiflett, thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate your breakdown. Thanks, you.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
And guys, a major milestone on this day 15 years ago, Massachusetts became the first state in the United States to legalize same-sex marriage. Here's a look at the front page of that Boston Globe that day with the headline, "Free to Marry." And another historic day overseas with major celebrations in Taipei. Taiwan is becoming the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, a new law that will take effect on May 24th. So I want to bring in Jay Lin. He's an LGBTQ activist and Taiwanese media exec in Taiwan, along with Jennifer Liu. She's with the Marriage Equality Coalition in Taiwan. So guys, thanks so much for joining us. Jay, I want to start with you. How major is this in a conservative society like Taiwan?
Well, today obviously has been an amazing day, as you can imagine. We're actually coming to midnight now, so we've had various rounds of celebrations and jubilations and tears of joy and happiness. What we have really been able to achieve here in Taiwan was something that I really didn't think would be possible for Asia. Having the chance to marry my spouse and finally having him be able to be also the legal parent to our 2 3-year-old children is something that I thought that was only kind of like a fantasy if I were living in the U.S. or living somewhere in Europe or the other 28 countries that have marriage equality. So this day means so much to me on a personal level and on a level of being a Taiwanese living here and achieving this through a democratic process, through public hearings and through debates and through pro-gay rallies, anti-gay rallies, through constitutional rulings, through pro-gay and anti-gay referendums, through lobbying and through hard grassroots efforts by so many people in Taiwan to reach this victory is totally an amazing and such an important day for not just people in Taiwan, but in Asia and I would assume all across the world.
Yes, it's incredible, and it's really awesome to see the images of everyone cheering out there. Jen, how did you feel when it was passed today?
Personally, I'm very happy, but also very exhausting. Taiwan is a very special situation that we went through the negotiation process and then the constitutional court's interpretation, and then the referendum, and then the legislation process, all within about 3 years. So it's very intense and very overwhelming in these 3 years. However, I can sense the whole country and every corner in this society feel love and happiness, and all of our governments, legislators, they show their support. So I can see the power of love. And on the other hand, I still feel like we need to continue the conversation, especially with those middle people. Some people, they might vote for against us last year, but I believe as long as we continue our conversation, more people in Taiwan will see there's only happiness and joy when marriage equality achieved in Taiwan. There won't be any negative impact in the future.
Yes, and Jay, I don't know if there was widespread support, but you can tell us if there was. And do you think that this will potentially start a trend for the rest of the continent, Jay?
Well, I mean, in Asia, there are a lot of bleak things that are happening. For example, in Malaysia, gay couples are getting caned. In Brunei, there's talk about stoning gays to death. And in China, there is complete censorship of LGBT characters and storylines in movies, TV, even online. And so I hope that what we're able to achieve here in Taiwan would have positive ripple effects, not just to the LGBT community there, but also to the mainstream community, as well as to the various governments and legislatures, for them to start caring more about a minority segment of the population and try to incorporate them so that they're equal and not second-class citizens. And so I do believe that this is going to have a very positive rippling effect. And I'm so happy that Taiwan was able to have this contribution to this continent.
All right, Jay Lin and Jennifer Liu, thank you so much for sharing your experience there. And guys, before we go, say it ain't so. Beloved internet star Grumpy Cat has died. Here's a look back on the life of one of the world's most famous felines. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us. If you want to stick around, you can check out the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can stay tuned for World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. It's the weekend. Enjoy yourself, and I'll see you next week.